Hey, I'm Shovel, and we're in kind of a weird place right now. We're in my kitchen, which is a little unusual for this channel, but this channel is above all else a place to learn. It's a place where I get to learn new skills. Like, I've never done a cooking show before, so I figured I'd try that out. And you might learn a new way to make tacos that you hadn't considered before. We're making vegan tacos, and we're going to make them 3 different ways. More than anything else, to show you how versatile this recipe is. It's one of those things that it doesn't really matter what you start with, because you can just kind of pile the right processes onto it. And I promise you this is easy, and end up with something that's pretty tasty. I know a lot of people still eat meat. I don't happen to eat meat. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. Trust me, you also eat stuff that happens to be vegan. Peanut butter jelly sandwiches, vegan. You eat chips and salsa, also vegan. The nice thing with this is that if you're making tacos out of beef or chicken or pork or whatever else, but you have a family member or a guest that doesn't eat those things, they can feel like they're welcome and catered to, and everyone's happy. So today the tacos I'm gonna make is gonna be too much. I'm gonna make tacos out of all of these different things here, which is way more than my wife and I can eat in a single day, but I don't wanna make multiple videos. The point here is to demonstrate versatility, so we're just gonna have a bunch of leftovers. The things I'm gonna use are textured vegetable protein. This is called TVP or soy protein. It is ridiculously inexpensive. It's like the leftovers from making vegetable oil. The beans and stuff that they make the vegetable oil out of have still a lot of nutritional value, protein and stuff like that left over. And so TVP is basically the equivalent of ground beef, just made out of soybeans. Like I said, it's very inexpensive. Another great thing with this is if you're going camping, you can bring this with you and then rehydrate it wherever you happen to end up, which means you don't need to refrigerate it on the way to where you're going. It's also a lot lighter because it's dehydrated. So, you know, if you have a water source available at your destination, you don't have to carry it, especially if you're backpacking. But otherwise, it's just a really good analog for meat in a lot of different things. You don't cook it exactly the same way. It's actually a little bit easier to cook in my opinion, but we're gonna make some out of this. Next thing we're gonna use is potatoes. So I've got a bunch of these guys here. It really doesn't matter what kind of potato you start with. These are some Yukon Golds. I also have some leftover potatoes from our garden out front that I probably ought to use before they start drying out or something. And so I'm gonna combine all those guys into the potato tacos. And the last thing I'm gonna use is something called hominy. Hominy is something you might already be familiar with, but I've been surprised that a lot of people are not familiar with it. So if you're not familiar with hominy, it's the same stuff that grits are made out of. It's also kind of, you can think of it like the raw ingredients for corn nuts, which means you're kind of gonna end up making like corn nut tacos, which is kind of awesome. So we're gonna use hominy. These are actually my favorite out of all these things. I love potatoes, but I think these are my favorite filling for tacos. So let's get started. Since this is 3 different foundation ingredients, that means that there's 3 different processes that I'm gonna undergo for this. Don't get too caught up in the process. I'm gonna show you the important part right up front, the thing that makes this from just like a raw ingredient into something that becomes really savory and satisfying inside of tacos. And that is what you add to those foundation ingredients. So I'm gonna start by doing this stuff because you do have to soak this stuff in water in order to get it to rehydrate and plump up and everything. The stuff that's actually important and crucial to making it have that taco filling flavor, that savoriness to it, is something called sazon. And this is just one brand of it by a company called Iberia. You can also get it from Goya. And I'm actually gonna try a new one that I've never had before, but by Badia. I'm assuming that that's how it's said. Never tried this one, but sazon is available at any supermarket that carries a wide array of Mexican foods, and you can also order it online. I'll put a link down below where you can order it from Amazon. My favorite one is this one from Iberia. Although there are a lot of other different ones. I've had ones that are not so good, at least in my opinion, so I guess your mileage may vary, but this stuff's really good. Goya is also really good, so in case Goya is all that's available, Goya's, actually this stuff tastes like identical to Goya's. The other ingredient that's really important, especially if you're using the TVP, mushroom seasoning. Now this stuff I get at a Korean market. They don't have it at every supermarket, but the Korean markets all seem to have it. So if you have an Oriental or Asian market nearby to you and you're able to buy, you know, all the different food they have there, they're gonna have dried mushroom seasoning. This stuff will give you that umami, meaty flavor. And it's really important for something like TVP, which has the texture of meat, but not really the flavor of it. So this stuff, plus the sazon, plus a few other little things, is gonna really make it taste delicious. The other thing that's important to have is some oil. I know that we all want to try and, you know, lose a little bit of that gut that we get, especially around Thanksgiving time. But you do have to have a bit of oil in order to give it that mouthfeel and really distribute the flavor around and make it enjoyable. So what I like using for that is grapeseed oil. Grapeseed oil has very little flavor of its own, and so it doesn't impart a lot of different flavor the way that, for example, peanut oil or olive oil will. It's just a really light oil with a very high smoke point, so you can kind of just throw it into almost anything. It's my dump truck of oils. That's the nice thing with this. They say that cooking is kind of an art form while baking is more of a science. I don't really have the head for doing baking science stuff anyways. That's not my area of expertise. So doing it this way works out perfect for a guy like me. For rehydrating the TVP, it's pretty much 1-to-1 water to TVP. So I'll just put in a cup of TVP and then a cup of water. Then at this point, I like to add the sazon already on this stuff so that it kind of can soak in there a little bit. The protein doesn't really actually like to absorb a whole lot into itself, but there's enough little crumbs that the surface area will kind of pick up some of the seasoning. This also has some salt in it, and I think it probably has some MSG or whatever in it as well. And so that's going to just kind of enhance the flavor there. The other thing you'll notice about this is it's extremely red, which is kind of good in a way because it simulates the, the red coloring that meat has usually, and so that part's kind of, I guess, a nice ingredient in it. For how much of this mushroom seasoning to use, not a whole lot. It doesn't really take a ton of it. That's not a specific amount. It doesn't really matter that much exactly how much or how little you use. If you use too much of it, it's going to be delicious. If you use too little of it, it's going to be delicious. So don't think too hard about it. And then grapeseed oil, again, it doesn't matter exactly how much you use. Just for kind of an example on this, I'd probably use, about that much roughly. And the reason I add that now instead of later when I'm cooking it is, you don't really treat this the way that you treat ground beef, because if you try to brown it, it's not going to brown. It's just going to stick to your pan. That's one thing that may not necessarily be intuitive if you're used to cooking with ground beef. You don't brown this stuff. If you do try to brown it, it's just going to end up just getting stuck to the pan. It's not really going to brown. I've seen some wizards actually get away with browning it, and I don't know if they use like a super hot pan or what their deal is, but for me, I just don't bother browning it. It doesn't really enhance it in any way as far as I'm concerned, so I don't. That's obviously not a lot of ingredients. I'm going to just let that sit for a little while. It's still a little bit watery. I'm not sure how well you'll see that. It's still a little bit watery, so it's going to absorb that over the next several minutes while I prepare the other stuff. So it's just going to hang out over here. Since I'm doing potato tacos, those take the longest to bake, and so the next thing I'm going to do is start chopping those guys up. There's not really much to it. You just chop them into like roughly 3/4 inch cubes, give or take, and we'll show you the next step after I got that done. While I was dicing up the potatoes, the TVP absorbed most of the water, so that's going to just continue hanging out over here. I've got the potatoes all diced up, and whether you choose to skin them or not is entirely up to you. My wife usually likes them skinned. I skinned the ones that we grew here at home, but left the skins on the Yukon Golds that I bought at the store. I'm not sure it matters too much. Anyway, I've also got a casserole dish here. You might have seen like oven potato recipes that ask you to pre-spray down like a nonstick coating onto the casserole dish, but we're going to add enough vegetable oil to this that it's going to pretty much not stick. It's really not going to be an issue, so there's no point in doing that. We're just going to go ahead and dump these straight in there for now. When I was preparing the TVP, I added the sazon. I also added the mushroom seasoning. We're going to do things very slightly different with the potatoes. I am still going to use the sazon because this is kind of central to the thesis of this entire video. I'm not going to use the mushroom seasoning, although you can. It works pretty well either way. The one challenge is I'm going to cook these relatively hot. I've got the oven preheated to 415 degrees, and so we're going to let that continue to preheat. And that really high temperature can sometimes sort of burn a little bit the stuff that you're going to add to the potatoes. Some of that is good because you get that like roasty Maillard reaction taking place, but some of it's not so good. And the mushrooms are one of the things that it's kind of iffy. It's not really ideal in my opinion. So no mushrooms on that, but you can choose to add it if you want to, especially if you're going to cook at a lower temperature, like say 350 degrees for close to an hour or 50-ish minutes. That makes it a lot easier to use the mushroom flavoring if you want to. If you're going to go for a crispier, faster cooked potato, then you're going to probably want to omit that particular ingredient. So first thing, I'm going to add the sazon, and since there's a lot of potatoes, I'm going to use 2 packets of this. Not really that important how you measure it out, but 2 packets looks about right for about that much potato. Some extra stuff I like adding to the potatoes that I think is really important to really bring out the flavor is Mexican oregano. This is not the same thing as oregano that you might put on a pizza. This is Mexican oregano. In fact, if you can't get Mexican oregano, I would not substitute regular oregano. It would actually make it worse. So Mexican oregano is awesome. You can get that at pretty much any grocery store that caters to Mexican food. Otherwise, you may have to order it or just live without it. I don't know how to really describe it. It's kind of like a sage type flavor. But yeah, I wouldn't use like Italian oregano as a substitute. The other thing is corn flour or masa. So I'm going to use a little bit of masa on there. What that's going to do is add more texture to the potatoes. It's going to give it more surface area for it to hold all the different flavors and stuff in there. It's just going to make it a much more satisfying bite when you're actually eating it. As for the amount to add, it doesn't matter. Add some. Just add some. This is probably about that much is how much I'm going to add. Oil, I'm going to add quite a bit of it actually, because I want the potatoes to kind of fry up a little bit in it. I want it to carry all the flavor around in it. So that means that there's going to be some leftover oil at the bottom when I'm done cooking this. It's going to take up whatever it's going to take up, and the leftover oil is just going to sit in the bottom of the pan. I'm not putting like a whole cup or anything in there, but I'm going to put what looks like kind of a lot up front. So all told, that's probably like 3 fluid ounces, maybe half a cup, give or take. I'm also going to add a little bit of dried hatch pepper to it. Not necessary, but I just like the kick. Since this is something that really doesn't require a lot of precision, I'm also going to slice up this Fresno pepper and stick little tiny bits of that all in it. And I'm going to microplane a couple cloves of garlic and add those to it just to kind of enhance the flavor a little. This part here can sometimes be a pain in the neck to just get everything integrated and stirred around. Just want to make sure everything's pretty equally coated with all the different ingredients. You can see here that everything is pretty well coated, and even though it's not just a single layer deep, it's not too deep either. We wouldn't want to fill this all the way up. So make sure you've got enough space for it. This is probably as deep as you'd want to go. I don't think I'd want to go any deeper than that. Then that goes in the oven. If you've ever made oven cube potatoes, it pretty much follows the same rule. So in this case, we're doing like 420 degrees for about half an hour. You can also do it at a lower temperature for a longer duration. Not really all that critical which way you go with it. You're gonna have to check for doneness at some point along the way anyways. So just use it as a general guideline. While that's cooking, I'm going to prepare the other stuff that's going to be necessary to make tacos into tacos, because there's more to tacos than just simply the meat or meat analog. And then I'm going to get started on the hominy because that's the easiest one to cook. I didn't have a whole lot of onion left. I'm going to put some of it into the hominy tacos, which you'll see in a moment, and some of it I left raw so that I could add that to the other tacos because onion's delicious. But yeah, I just didn't have a whole lot left, so I had to kind of split it up. For the hominy, the first step is to drain it. So just drain out all the liquid that's in there. You're not going to need that. Once it's out of the can, the hominy looks like this. Like I said, it kind of looks like the raw ingredients for corn nuts. The only reason I transferred them into this glass thing here is just to show you. Ordinarily, I would just throw it straight in the pan, but I wouldn't throw it straight in the pan before putting a little bit of oil down in the pan and kind of getting it ready. For the hominy, I'm going to be trying a different brand of sazon that I haven't used before, so I'm still going to use just 1 packet for that size can, and I'm also going to be using the mushroom seasoning, and I'm going to be using part of an onion that I chopped up, the homegrown pepper that I had. I'm just going to add that in there for a little extra flavor. And one more thing I'm going to add to it. This is completely optional, but I'm also going to be adding some salsa to it. As you've probably figured out, I'm not a chef. I've never been to culinary school, and I have no idea what the heck I'm doing. I usually cook this at about 3/4 temperature, whatever that is, like a little bit above half, but below all the way. And I find that that works out pretty well. It's enough to kind of sizzle, but not enough to burn. Since I haven't made any fresh salsa for a while, I just got this little canned thing. These are ridiculously cheap. I think even now in 2024, this was 88 cents. And it's pretty good for this purpose. To get it going, you pretty much just kind of dump it, stir it in there so it doesn't get stuck to the bottom, heat it up for a little while, and you're kind of done. It's kind of dead easy. It doesn't take a whole lot of the mushroom seasoning for this. I'm certain that someone is going to think it's blasphemous to add the salsa with that much oil because they're going to kind of fry. Oh, fried salsa is so good though. That's kind of the point. For the TVP, I'm going to add a little bit more oil to the pan, and I'm also going to add a little bit of garlic that I microplaned because that's just going to kind of make it taste better in my opinion. But yeah, not really much to that. Again, just like I mentioned earlier on that, you don't want to actually brown it because it doesn't brown the way that meat does. It just kind of ends up sticking to the pan, which you don't want. So you actually cook it a little bit cooler than you would cook ground beef. And just, don't actually let it brown. You're going to want to kind of stir it around. It's also not a bad idea to keep a little extra water on hand just in case you need to add it while it's in there. If the sink is, for example, on the other side of some camera apparatus or whatever and not immediately available, you can just add some water if it looks like it's drying out too much. Oven timer just went off on the potatoes, so I'm going to pull those out and see what they look like. I might flip them over inside of the casserole dish. Don't worry if they get kind of busted up a little bit doing that. That kind of is a non-issue because you're going to chew them once they're in the taco. So that's not really a big deal. If anything, it's more surface area that can soak up the flavor. So pull them out, see what they look like. They're sizzling pretty good and they're probably okay. But I think I'm going to give them a little bit longer. The TVP took very little time to cook. As you can see, it was the last thing I got started. So that stuff I'm just going to let sit there and cool off while I get the rest of the stuff ready here. By the rest of the stuff, I've already got the veggies chopped and whatever to stick in there. I'm just going to get some tortillas and heat them up. And let me show you what this stuff looks like. Like I mentioned at the start, this does have a bit of extra oil in it, and I may have added maybe a little more than I absolutely needed to. That oil is going to kind of drain out to the bottom of what you're cooking. It's not too different from meat in that regard. What you can do if you want to limit how much oil is in it, you can push it all over to one side and the oil will for the most part drain out of it without losing too much of your flavor. Or alternately, if you just don't put quite so much oil in from the very beginning, and then be really mindful of how hot you cook it, because of course if you cook it really hot, you're going to burn it without that oil there to distribute the heat around it. One more trick for finishing vegan tacos, if you are actually making them fully vegan, is unsweetened yogurt that's made out of coconut milk or made out of something like that. I think tastes a lot more like real sour cream than like Daya or the other vegan sour creams out there. I don't really like them, so this stuff here ends up being a pretty good alternative for regular sour cream that really satisfies and has that kind of creamy flavor to it. Of course, if you're not vegan and you're just making these things because you think they're delicious, then you can use just regular sour cream as well. This stuff is awesome with potatoes. And this Bunkster's is awesome with the hominy. Oh no, a wild wife appeared. A wild wife. So my wife is ultimately the person that I have to please when I'm cooking food. And so she's the ultimate test of whether or not I've cooked anything that she's capable of enduring. So have a seat if you'd like to. There are tacos. I'm also going to enjoy tacos. I'm not poisoning you, I promise you. And let's eat.
That yogurt works really well.
All right, we're going to stop being weird and eating in the camera. Thanks for watching.